"Open this door right now." That's what she was yelling inside my house while I was 12 miles away at the farm supply store, the last place anyone expects their neighbor to show up uninvited. I had driven out to pick up a specific grain supplement Rex needs and figured a quick trip wouldn't hurt. My phone buzzed as I was loading the bags into the truck. The notification was blunt. Motion detected in kitchen area. I tapped the camera feed and there she was, heels clicking on my linoleum like she owned the place, cabinet doors slamming, that smug voice pitched to sound official. The sight made my throat go dry. Lydia Pierce wasn't supposed to be in my house. And on the screen I could already see Rex easing into position, alert but steady, the way he had 1,000 times when he worked for the military. Years of training don't leave a dog like him. They settle into his bones and wait for a moment like this. What would you do if your neighbor was screaming in your kitchen and you were 12 miles away? I toggled the speaker. "K9 unit is recording," I said, my voice coming out calmer than I felt. Lydia jerked like she'd been shocked. She spun around, eyes searching for a human. The look on her face told me everything. People don't expect professional surveillance in a rural farmhouse. Around here folks think a security system means a porch light and a good set of ears. She had walked into a different world entirely. Rex didn't so much as flinch. He moved into a position that gave him a view of the door, keeping himself between Lydia and the only easy exit. Ears forward, breathing even, weight balanced. To anyone else, he might look like a statue, calm, neutral, indifferent. I know better. That stillness is work. He was reading her, posture, tone, hands, the tiny shifts that separate a nervous person from a real threat. There's a difference between a watchdog and a working partner. Rex is the latter in every way. Lydia knocked a chair into the counter and nearly tripped over it. Her voice was full of bluster. "This is an emergency agricultural inspection," she announced, to a dog, as if he'd asked to see a badge. I watched the micro-expressions shift across her face as she processed the reality in front of her. The remote lock engaged with a soft click, which meant my system had gone from record to containment. She tried the handle, found it secure, and turned back to face Rex with a new kind of panic. He had positioned himself where he could see every path she might take. He didn't growl or show teeth. He didn't need to. Quiet authority does its own work. I kept talking, letting the words fill the kitchen for all of us. "K9 unit is recording everything," I repeated. My partner's been waiting for this moment. The absurdity of it hit me even as adrenaline thrummed through my veins. Lydia standing in my kitchen pretending to be the state while explaining herself to a dog trained to ignore nonsense and focus on the mission. She tried angles the way people do when they're used to getting their way. Authority first. "I have emergency powers under Agricultural Code section." Rex didn't care. He responds to behavior, not borrowed phrases. Then she tried familiarity, her voice going sticky sweet. "Good boy. Nice doggy." He held his ground and watched her, professional as ever. By the time I was 10 minutes out, the situation had made it beyond our fences. My neighbor, Maggie Walsh, had seen the scene through my porch window and was live streaming from the fence line. That woman never misses a beat. The chat exploded, comments flying too fast to read. Half the viewers were calling Lydia a burglar who'd been caught. The other half kept pointing out that Rex looked like a sentry in uniform. There's a particular look to a trained working dog. Even people who don't know what it is recognize it when they see it, the stillness, the focus, the lack of theatrics. Someone must have called it in, because I heard Sheriff Diaz's radio crackle on Maggie's livestream before I saw his cruiser. County Sheriff responding to reported intrusion. K9 unit has situation contained. Those words carry weight in our district. Everyone knows what a trained working dog can do when properly deployed. The fact that Lydia was learning that lesson inside my kitchen instead of in front of my gate is on her. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, neighbors had gathered in cautious knots. They kept their distance from the door, but close enough to watch through the glass. Rex was holding the entry like he was born there. Lydia had ended up at my kitchen table, hands visible on the oilcloth like a school kid caught copying during a test. He stayed by the door, patient as stone. Diaz arrived right as I was getting out of the truck. He's former military himself, understands working dogs better than most. We exchanged a look. Situation contained, he asked. Per protocol, I said, loud enough that the neighbors could hear me on Maggie's live stream. Working dog engaged. Surveillance and containment active. Evidence recorded. He nodded once and stepped inside. Rex acknowledged him with a shift of the head and the slightest softening, then held position until I gave him the stand-down command. Only then did the atmosphere shift from tactical to administrative. But the damage to Lydia's story was already done. Whatever she thought she was doing, she'd walked into a kitchen that doubles as a rural security checkpoint when nobody's home. She presented credentials from something called Agri-Home Solutions Emergency Response Division. Looked fancy at first glance. Seals, emergency numbers, heavy paper. Diaz took one look and radioed the agricultural department to verify. The case log pinged on his tablet. The critical line, Emergency Agricultural Inspection Authority isn't a thing in our county code. It doesn't exist. Meanwhile, Maggie's chat did something I didn't expect. Farmers and ranchers from across the state piled in, dissecting Lydia's words like a flock of crows on corn. They caught details I might have missed. Where's her testing equipment? Emergency inspections require 3 witness signatures, state regs. That seal's wrong. The internet can be a sorry mess, but when you hit a nerve in a rural community, collective knowledge beats a counterfeit every time. Rex tracked the chemical sprayer Lydia had brought inside. Search, Diaz told him. Indicate. Rex worked the scent like it was a trail he'd been on 100 times, zeroing in on the sprayer with quick precision. It wasn't aggression. It was the methodical kind of attention you only get from a dog who's spent years detecting things you and I can't smell. It made for a stark contrast against Lydia's story about feeling threatened. The camera shows a dog uncovering planted evidence, not baring teeth. The final cracks appeared almost by accident. Maggie zoomed in on the paperwork Lydia had dropped during her scramble to the table. The emergency division phone number routed to a vague voicemail. The website didn't exist. The seals were copied from somewhere else, cheap graphics slapped on to look official. When Diaz asked Lydia about the agricultural code section again, she changed her answer. Then she changed it again. The story kept rearranging itself. That's the problem with lies. Under pressure, they shift like a stand of rushes in a creek. He issued a formal trespass warning before he left. Unauthorized entry onto private property. Failure to provide legitimate inspection credentials. Interference with lawful K-9 security operations. Each phrase matters because each one carries weight if this went to court. Lydia took the paperwork with hands that trembled, whether from anger or the realization that she'd just slammed into a professional barrier she hadn't planned for. But if you've ever dealt with people like her, you know a warning isn't the end. It's a decision point. She walked out with her chin up, focused, calculating. Rex watched her go, alert posture until the car dust had settled back down onto the gravel. He knows the difference between confusion and intent. He knows what it looks like when trouble isn't over. I had my answer by morning. A fine notice was taped to my door like clockwork. Obstruction of agricultural safety inspection. $7.50 penalty. Retaliation dressed up as policy. I peeled it off and let it sit on the counter while I brewed coffee, staring at the county letterhead. It was going to be one of those weeks. 3 days later, Susan Miller trudged up my steps with something wrapped in an old cloth bag. Susan's bones carry decades of work, and her steps say someone who used to be sure-footed has been walking on eggshells lately. Rex caught her scent 50 yards out and alerted, ears forward, attention locked, not aggressive, just present. Before she even reached the porch she was talking. That equipment, she said, setting the spray bottle on the railing with hands that shook, creates fake agricultural chemical signatures. Rex's nose quivered, processing the compounds. Susan told me how Lydia had used bottles like that on her property 2 months back, manufacturing contamination to justify an emergency inspection. For the first time in 40 years, Susan thought her own nose had betrayed her, until she realized someone else's chemicals had tricked it. Rex worked the perimeter at my command, methodically moving along the fence line toward where Lydia had parked the day before. When he reached the spot, he sat hard and looked at me. That sit is his way of writing it in ink. Something artificial was deployed here. Something that doesn't belong in the natural chemical environment of a working farm. His training included detection of explosives, But chemistry doesn't care what the compound is labeled. Some signatures look the same through a working dog's brain. The map he drew with his nose was one more piece in a pattern. The agricultural fraud scheme that had just walked through my kitchen was bigger than a single kitchen door. We pulled receipts and logs from Susan's files at her kitchen table. It wasn't cheap in terms of dollars. It was costly in terms of dignity. Her emergency compliance agreement was written to look like protection and function like a key. It granted ongoing monitoring and treatment with broad authority for access. Terms that sounded like help read like permission slips for indefinite visits. Lydia's game relied on fear and false urgency, claims about chemicals leaching into groundwater, livestock affected, liability waiting in the dark. If you've ever farmed, you know the burdens of responsibility. The right person with the right jargon can make you feel like you're one day away from being the person who poisoned the neighborhood. That's the kind of leverage that breaks old farmers and robs them of sleep. Rex's detection logs revealed what Susan couldn't have known standing on her own porch trying to think while someone waved papers in her face. His memory of the last week showed similar chemical markers at multiple sites across the district, all appearing 1 or 2 days before an inspection by Agri-Home Solutions. It was too neat to be coincidence. Patterned fraud targeting elderly farmers, fear-based, staged, efficient. The next wave hit like propaganda always does, in clusters and whispers. Flyers appeared overnight. Dangerous military attack dog threatens agricultural safety, printed in red across a photo of Rex's certification collar. Someone circled his equipment and scrawled weapon with a thick marker. They were taped to mailboxes, stapled to fence posts, tucked under windshield wipers in the farm supply store parking lot. We walked into the town hall meeting and people who used to wave suddenly scowled. Parents pulled their kids closer. The strategy was obvious. Make the working dog look like a problem so future inspections could proceed without interference. Attack dogs don't belong on family farms, someone said into the microphone, reading language that sounded like it was handed out with the flyers. Those animals can't tell the difference between inspectors and threats. Rex stood beside me in a perfect heel, the picture of control. He has spent hours in schools and crowded places. He knows how to be in a room with 100 human heartbeats and pretend he's somewhere else. But a working dog's feelings aren't made of steel. The whispers landed. The looks landed. I watched him read the faces of people who used to hand out carrots and now refused to meet his eyes. Military training doesn't prepare you for small-town cold shoulders. Animal control arrived for an evaluation because someone called in a complaint about aggressive military dog conducting unauthorized patrol operations in agricultural community. Rex responded to their drills with machine precision. Track. Indicate. Hold. Down. He didn't so much as flick an ear in annoyance at their equipment. But I saw the confusion in his eyes when they treated him like a potential threat. He's not a machine. He understands tone and intent. Spray paint across my barn door, stinging red under the porch light. Killer dog. Fresh scratches on Maggie's farm equipment allegedly made by the aggressive K9 next door, clearly carved by tools if you've seen a claw mark before, which most of us have. And then someone edited footage, cutting the audio and splicing clips from Rex's collar camera to make it look like he was charging when he was actually following commands. I pulled the hash logs from the camera and showed the timestamps. Metadata doesn't lie. But lies are easier to spread than proofs. I considered retiring him. That's the part nobody wants to admit. I sat at the table one night with his head on my knee and thought about trading our peace for the sense that I'd kept him safe. But it wouldn't stop what Lydia was building. It would remove the one thing standing in her way, evidence. Sheriff Diaz came by after dark and sat with Rex on the porch. He didn't talk to me first. He talked to Rex. "You want a mission?" he asked softly, and Rex's ears went up like a kid's. Diaz turned to me. "We stop this by documenting it, not by arguing in a hall. Your dog is a professional. Use that." The agricultural department confirmed the next day what we already knew. Nobody in our county has emergency inspection power to storm into kitchens. Agri-Home Solutions was a fiction with letterhead. The tide started to turn when we invited animal control and agricultural officials to watch Rex's scent detection demonstration. He moved through controlled tests with the quiet competence that is his true nature. He distinguished between real farm chemicals and cheap compounds that smell like industrial trouble to human noses. Watching that nose work is like watching a craftsman's hands, humbling, precise. People who had shouted at meetings sat quiet and took notes. It was federal investigators who finally called it what it was, an agricultural fraud operation using manufactured emergencies to target elderly farm owners for access and fees. My phone lit up with a request that made me sit down hard on the porch step. They wanted K-9 assistance. They wanted Rex. Before long, 3 neighbors showed up together at my fence with paperwork. Susan led them, with 2 other farmers behind her clutching their own compliance agreements like evidence of a bad marriage. They each told a version of the same story. Rex stood near us, steady as a post, giving them the confidence to keep talking. He has a way of making people feel witnessed without judgment. They needed that. Embarrassment eats you from the inside when someone pulls a trick on you, and it's worse when you pride yourself on being the person people call for help. Rex worked the circuit with me that afternoon. We visited the other farms. He mapped the chemical signatures like he'd been taught to map a search grid. 7 properties. Similar compounds. Similar timing. Similar words used to frighten decent people into signing emergency agreements. The patterns lined up with the county's calendar. Manufactured crises during planting, calving, harvest. Moments when stress is high and a scare feels plausible. Real rural security work doesn't require gadgets. It requires paying attention to what's in season. We reported back to the county board in my farmhouse kitchen, because that's where life happens out here. Officials who had dismissed complaints a month earlier listened hard with their elbows on my table. We never authorized private emergency powers, one admitted. We assumed agricultural concerns required immediate response. We didn't verify. Hearing that made my jaw clench. Farmers deserve better than assumptions. Their lives are complicated, the stakes high. That's why real agricultural code enforcement needs clarity, not theatrics. It's why rural community safety depends on earned trust. The federal investigation requested K-9 support for an expanded operation. It felt strange to go from being the guy accused of harboring an attack dog to signing off on a working dog deployment plan. We laid out the approach. If people wanted to see civilian-safe working dog use, they were going to get a textbook case. I was scheduled to attend an agricultural conference in a different county. The plan was to leave the house looking empty. Hidden cameras would run. Rex would stay behind, assigned to surveillance mode, no intervention, no confrontation, just patient observation and scent work. It's not glamour. It's the sort of thing a disciplined K-9 excels at. She came in exactly as predicted, back farm roads, no main routes, the kind of approach you choose when you know you're doing something you shouldn't. She carried the same spray bottles and devices and moved with the ease of someone who has done this many times. Rex recorded everything, from the moment she stepped out of her car to the moment she knelt by the fence line, unscrewing caps like she was topping off a stew pot. He held position. That's the part that makes me proudest. Dogs like Rex are trained to act, but also to wait. His training told him not to rush, not to reveal himself, not to scare the quarry, but to let the net cinch tight. He recorded the audio when she took a call, dropping names like breadcrumbs, contacts in other counties, numbers that matched complaint logs, a brag about the monthly take that made me see red. $12,000 a month. Manufactured emergencies peddled to people who would never forgive themselves if their farm hurt their neighbors. When federal agents rolled up under warrant the next morning, Rex remained in overwatch until the takedown was complete. He didn't bark or lunge or showboat. He looked like what he is, a professional doing his job, providing agricultural security for a rural community under attack by someone waving paperwork and fear. The evidence on his camera was the kind of thing prosecutors dream of: clean footage, clear audio, a time-stamped sequence that told a story a jury could understand. It wasn't dramatic. It was thorough. That's what wins cases. Search warrants followed for equipment storage units bought under shell company names. The network unfolded like a map of county lines. 7 states. 47 elderly farm owners targeted. The arrogance of it is what sticks in my craw, a belief that rural property owners are soft targets, that official-looking documents and a few technical terms can break down a lifetime of good sense. 3 weeks later, Rex wore a new vest to the community celebration. It said Agricultural Security K-9 in bright letters. The same hall where flyers had once branded him a monster was filled with kids asking to see scent detection demonstrations and parents who wanted to know how a working dog reads a situation. He accepted the attention with his trademark patience, ears turning toward each voice in turn. County officials spoke about rural security reforms, verification procedures, code enforcement clarity, policies requiring legitimate credentials before anyone sets foot in a farmhouse kitchen. They talked about how working dog certification fits into agricultural protection. The phrase that kept echoing was evidence-based. That's what this was. Not a personality battle. Not a popularity vote. Proof. Susan told her story again, this time as a witness rather than a victim. That dog's nose caught what my 40 years missed, she said into the microphone. I'll admit to being fooled by the smell of the chemicals and a clipboard, but I won't ever forget how it felt when this community believed a lie about a dog who never hurt anyone. She glanced at me and nodded. Rex nodded back in his way, one soft blink and a calm breath. I swear the old girl sitting 2 rows back started clapping before the official started and didn't stop. The reforms have teeth now. Federal agricultural fraud prevention guidelines require third-party verification before emergency inspections proceed, working dog scent detection included. County officials established a protocol that demands an independent check when someone claims chemical contamination on a farm. That doesn't mean we put dogs on every call. It means we use every tool we have responsibly. Rural security depends on that. Kids come out to the farm in groups now for demonstrations. They learned the difference between a pet and a partner. They ask good questions. How does he know the smell? What happens if he's wrong? Can he tell the difference between fertilizer and something bad? We explain working dog training, the nose that is a miracle of evolution, and the way discipline frees a dog to be safe. If there's a victory bigger than a federal conviction, it's this, a classroom in a field learning not to fear what they don't understand. As for Lydia, she took a plea deal. Federal court doesn't play around. She admitted to interstate agricultural fraud affecting elderly farm owners, agreed to restitution, and left the district under supervision. The last time her vehicle passed my place, Rex was on duty, alert but relaxed, tail low, ears high. We didn't wave. We didn't gloat. We just watched her go. Not long after that, a letter arrived from federal investigators asking if we'd consult on similar cases in other rural communities. I sat on the porch with the letter in my hand and Rex at my feet. We've both seen enough to know what a second chance looks like when it shows up. It's not noisy. It doesn't set off fireworks. It looks a lot like a quiet morning on a farm that's finally yours again, paired with the knowledge that your odd set of tools, farm security cameras, a nose that can outsmart chemicals, a county sheriff who understands a working dog when he sees one, a neighbor who will stream the truth when it matters, can protect someone else's kitchen next week. The hardest lesson of this whole mess wasn't about paperwork or chemicals or HOA games dressed up with emergency words. It was this. Sometimes you can't argue your way out of someone's lie. You have to show it. You need proof. In a rural community, proof looks like time-stamped footage, a sheriff's report, a working dog sit at the spot where a fraudster thought nobody would notice, and a crowd of neighbors willing to admit they learned something. That's how you protect property rights when manufactured authority walks up your steps. That's how you keep rural community safety from being used as a weapon against you. That's how you remind people that a trained working dog is not a threat, he's a guardian. If you've read this far, I'd truly like to hear what you think. We don't always get to pick our fights. Sometimes they break into your kitchen at noon while you're buying grain. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. Keep your cameras rolling, guard your peace, and don't let anyone talk you out of what you know your eyes, and in my case, my dog's nose, are telling you.